Hey guys, it's Jake Smith. Welcome back to the second episode in this series on communication between Arduino and Macs. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to send multiple values from Arduino and separate those out and read those individually in Macs using two separate methods. The Macs patch that we're using today is one that we created in our previous video. So if you haven't seen that, I'll link that down below for you to watch through, and that will hopefully help you understand the order that we've created this in. If not, if you don't have the time to do that, you can always just copy this out here and get stuck in from this point. So as we're sending multiple different values, we're going to start by creating three different values, three different integers, and we'll call those counter 1, counter 2, and counter 3, and we'll make those all equal to 0. Next, what we want to do is we need to set up our baud rate, and we'll use serial.begin for this. We're using 9600, and we need to make sure that this value is the same as whatever baud rate we're using in Macs. Now finally, for our loop section, we're going to create an if statement that will count our values up, and then once they reach a certain value, we'll reset them. So if counter 1 is less than 20, then we want counter 1 to add each time. And what we'll do is we want to make sure that we can tell the difference between each value that we're sending, so that we're not accidentally sending the same value over and over again. And we can do that by making each value count at different intervals. So counter 2 will say plus equals 2, and that will add 2 each time. And counter 3, we can say plus equals 3. So we'll leave a section here for our outputting messages, and we'll add a short delay of 200 milliseconds, and this means that we're just not sending values too quickly. Finally, we need to reset our counters when they reach a certain value. So in this case, when counter 1 equals 20, we'll say that equals 0, counter 2 also needs to equal 0, and counter 3. Okay, great. So we're going to be looking at two different methods of receiving multiple messages in Macs. Those are using the objects unpack or root. We'll start with unpack. So if we go over to the Macs patch here, we'll create an unpack object. Now with unpack, the way that you receive multiple values is you have to define how many different values you want to receive first. So let's say today we're going to receive 3 different values, counters 1, 2, and 3. To tell it how many values you want to receive and output, you write the number of intervals as the letter I. Integers even. So I stands for integer, and as we're outputting 3 different values, we're going to use 3 different integers. If you were using 4, you could add an extra one, so forth. But we're using 3 for now. So when I do this and I click outside, you can see we now have 3 different outputs, and those correspond to the 3 integers that we've created. So I can attach separate integer boxes to each of these outputs, and that should separate 3 different values. Now it's not good enough to just serial print line each message. We need to actually format our messages in a certain way. So for unpack, the way that we want to format our messages is we want to send each of our messages all on the same line, so messages 1, 2, and 3, but each message needs to be separated by a space. And then when we send them again, then we need a new line for them, so 1, 2, and 3, and so forth. So the way we're going to write this is we'll start off by saying serial print, and we'll print our first value, counter 1. Then we want to serial.print and add a space. And now we can copy this out for the second value and change this to counter 2. And for our third value, because we want to print this on a new line, we can say serial.println and type in counter 3. Great. So If I just unplug and plug back in my Arduino board and upload this, if you've seen the previous video, the reason that I'm doing that each time is that the Arduino can only communicate with one form of serial communication at a time. So that's either the Max console or the Arduino IDE. And if you have it connected up to Max, you need to disconnect it first before you can send or update your code from the IDE. So now that we've got the code uploaded, I can start this and hit this port function, and you can see we are getting our 3 different values output. And just to give you an example of why this is necessary, you can see here that we're reading the first integer, the first counter value out. If I was to add another integer, you'd hope that it would give us the second value, but it doesn't. It just repeats the first value. So unpack is the first way that we can send and separate out messages. And you can do this for as many messages as you need. You can add more values and have more spaces in between, but each time you need to add a line at the end. So you could do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then new line, and that would be written as, you know, get rid of this and add a new space line, and maybe this could be counter 3 times 2, for example. Now it is worth noting that as with unpack, all it's doing is it's just dividing up the 3 different values that we have, or in this case it will be 4. So let's just add another integer just to show you what that would look like. As we're just dividing them up, it's basically taking the first value that comes through, assigning that to this first output here, the second one, and assigning that to the second one, and the third one, and so forth. So if for whatever reason you were outputting these at different intervals in your project at different parts, they wouldn't necessarily come through the correct output at the correct time. You need to make sure that they are all aligned in the order that you want them to be outputted in order for them to come through the correct ports. Now, using root, you can actually bypass this issue, as you can actually assign names to each value that you're using. And this is especially helpful when you are using more advanced code that has different functions and you are sending different values at different times. And it also helps you keep track of where each value is coming from. So let's get rid of this for now, and we'll create a root object. So with root, similarly to unpack, we need to define the different values that we're using, but this time round we need to give them names rather than just writing I. So let's call our different values A, B, and C for now. And you can see this is a little bit different from our unpack object. We got 3 extra inputs here and an extra output here, but we can ignore those for now, and let's just connect up these values. As you can see, we are not getting any values out of the root object, even though we are still receiving values, and that's because we need to change the format that we're using in order for root to work. So if we turn this off for now, let's come back over to our Arduino sketch. So the way that we were formatting our values for unpack was we were sending all of our different values divided by spaces on the same line. For our root object, we actually need to format it in a way that we add the name first, so that's A, B, or C. In this case, let's start with A. Then we need to have a space, and then we can have our value. So first value would be like that, second value, so let's say B, and that can be value 2, and then our third value, which is C, and that can be value 3. And so forth. But each time you're sending a different value on a different line. So let's see how we write that out. Let's get rid of this for now. So let's start with our first message. So serial.print. So we're going to give it our name and have a space. So we're using A as our first name here. And let's close this off. And then we can say serial.println and the value that we're using. So in this case, we're using counter 1. Now, it's actually quite simple to organize things in this way. This is the same format that you need to basically give any value out if you're using root. But each time, all you need to do is the corresponding name that you've given here needs to match with this name here. Now this has the added advantage that essentially the way that you order your names here will correspond to how the outputs are ordered. And say you were sending these all at different intervals and B came through before C, before it would just, with unpack, it would just read the first value and assign that to there. But if it reads B, it will know that you have assigned that to this output and it will always come through the correct output. So let's carry on and format the rest of our messages. So I'm just going to copy and paste these and we'll change this to B, this one to C, and we're going to call this counter 2 and counter 3. So now if I again unplug my Arduino, plug it back in, wait for that to recognize it, and we can upload this. Okay, so that's done uploading. Let's turn this back on, hit port, and there you go. We have all of our different values output. So the last thing that I wanted to show you here is how you can kind of customize these names as well. So it doesn't have to just be a single letter title. You could actually call it something like, you could give it real names. So Fred, Susan, and let's say Amy as well. Now, as long as these names correspond to the names that you've given it here, let's say Fred, Susan, and actually let's change this up. So let's say that Susan is this first one we're sending, then Amy, and then we're sending Fred. And as long as these names correspond with these names here, it will output them to the correct port. Now, in this case, Susan will actually count up 1 at a time. Amy will count up 2 at a time because it's counter 2, and Fred will count up 3 at a time. So let's just see if this works. Let's turn this off, unplug it, plug it back in. Okay, and let's see what this happens. So here you go, you can see, so Susan, which is counting 1 at a time, that's correct. Amy's counting up 2 at a time, and Fred is counting up 3 at a time. So you can see you can actually reorganize the way that the messages are coming through and output them specifically to however that suits you. So this has been 2 different ways that you can send and receive multiple values from Arduino in Max. I hope this video has been helpful. Please do like and subscribe. I will be releasing more videos on communication between Arduino and Max, and I'm also going to be creating a lot of fun different projects that you can make at home yourself with your own Arduino boards and within Max. That's all for now. I'll see you next time.